November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving. While families across America prepared for a holiday feast, one man walked onto a plane with nothing but a briefcase. A man whose name would echo through history. A man who hijacked a jetliner, demanded $200,000, and then disappeared into the night sky without leaving a single trace. His name was Dan Cooper, but the world remembers him as D.B. Cooper. You are watching Mystery in the Dark, the channel that takes you deep into the shadows of history, where truth blends with legend and mysteries wait to be uncovered. If you think you know this story, think again. Tonight, we dive into America's only unsolved skyjacking, the chilling case of D.B. Cooper. It was a cold Wednesday afternoon in Portland, Oregon. The date: November 24, 1971. The world was buzzing with Thanksgiving travel. The airport was busy. Passengers were boarding flights. Luggage was moving. Announcements echoed across the terminal. At around 2 p.m., a quiet, middle-aged man walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. He was well-dressed. Dark suit, neatly pressed trousers, a black tie with a pearl tie pin, and a long overcoat. He looked like a businessman, the kind you wouldn't notice twice. The man gave his name as Dan Cooper and purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle. Just $20, paid in cash. No one thought twice. No one could have imagined that this man was about to pull off one of the most daring crimes in American history. At 2:50 p.m., Northwest Orient Flight 305 prepared to board. It was a Boeing 727, a three-engine jet, small by today's standards but a workhorse of its era. The flight was only 30 minutes long, from Portland to Seattle, a routine hop. There were just 36 passengers on board, along with 6 crew members. Among them, Captain William Scott, First Officer Bob Radachuk, Flight Engineer Harold Anderson, and the flight attendants Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow. Cooper took seat 18C, near the rear of the plane. From the very beginning, he was calm, too calm. He ordered a bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette. Back then, smoking was allowed on planes, and waited quietly. Nobody knew. This was the calm before the storm. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper slipped a folded note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She assumed it was just another businessman flirting. Without even looking, she dropped it into her pocket. But then, Cooper leaned closer and whispered, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." Her heart stopped. Hands trembling, she opened the note. Written neatly in all capital letters were the words that would change aviation history forever. "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit beside me." Schaffner sat next to him, trying to remain calm. Cooper opened his black briefcase just enough for her to peek inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Red sticks of dynamite, wires, and a large battery pack. It looked real, very real. Cooper's voice was steady, even polite. No shouting, no panic, just calm instructions. He told her to write down his demands. $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, 2 primary, 2 reserve, a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane, and one more condition: no funny business. If the FBI tried anything, the plane would go up in flames. Florence carried the note to Captain Scott in the cockpit. The crew froze in disbelief. This had never happened before in American history. A jetliner hijacked midair with a bomb. They immediately radioed Seattle Air Traffic Control. Word spread fast. FBI agents, Seattle police, and airline officials scrambled into action. The airline's president gave the order: comply with the hijackers' demands. Passenger lives came first. Meanwhile, Cooper sat calmly in his seat, sipping bourbon, chain-smoking cigarettes, wearing dark sunglasses that gave him an almost cinematic villain-like aura. He wasn't sweating. He wasn't nervous. He looked in control. Surprisingly, most passengers had no idea what was happening. They thought the plane was just circling due to routine delays. Cooper insisted the crew keep everyone calm. He even paid for his drinks, handing cash to the stewardess, a strange gesture for a man about to commit a crime. But behind the calm exterior was a man planning something extraordinary, something no hijacker had ever attempted before. And so the stage was set. A quiet flight had turned into the center of America's first major skyjacking. The FBI prepared the ransom. The passengers remained unaware, and D.B. Cooper waited, patiently, with a bomb in his briefcase, ready to make history. But what exactly did he want, and how did he plan to escape a locked plane, thousands of feet above the ground? Stay with us as the mystery deepens. Inside the Boeing 727, time felt frozen. For most passengers, it was just another short flight to Seattle. But in the rear cabin, history was unfolding. D.B. Cooper sat quietly, sunglasses on, cigarette smoke swirling around him, a bourbon in his hand, and a bomb in his briefcase. His voice was calm, almost unsettlingly calm. This was no reckless madman. This was a man with a plan. Cooper leaned in and dictated his terms to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She wrote them down carefully, every word feeling heavier than the last. I want $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, 2 main chutes, 2 reserves. A fuel truck, ready when we land in Seattle, no delays. And finally, no tricks, no police on the runway. If I see anything suspicious, I blow the plane to pieces. Schaffner carried the note to the cockpit. The crew exchanged silent looks of dread. They knew this was no bluff. The bomb looked real. They had no choice but to obey. At 3 p.m., Seattle Air Traffic Control contacted the FBI. Within minutes, the story spread like wildfire through law enforcement and the airline's chain of command. The airline's president, Donald Nyrop, made a critical decision: agree to everything. The passengers' lives came first. The FBI was ordered to assemble the ransom money, $200,000 in $20 bills, unmarked, small denominations, to make them harder to trace. Banks in Seattle scrambled to gather the cash. Each bill was carefully photographed, serial numbers recorded. By the time Cooper's plane was circling the skies above Seattle, law enforcement was racing against the clock. But Cooper's demand for parachutes raised eyebrows. Why would a hijacker ask for 4? FBI agents speculated. Maybe Cooper planned to take a hostage with him, forcing the authorities not to sabotage the parachutes. It was a clever psychological move. It forced the FBI to deliver real, functional equipment. By late afternoon, 2 main parachutes and 2 reserve chutes were secured from a local skydiving school. They were loaded onto the tarmac at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, waiting for the exchange. Meanwhile, inside Flight 305, passengers grew restless. The plane was circling endlessly over Seattle, burning fuel. Captain William Scott had told them only that a minor mechanical issue required a holding pattern. The truth was far darker. Behind them, in row 18, a man was calmly orchestrating one of the most daring heists in aviation history. Some passengers noticed the strange man in sunglasses, chain-smoking, rarely moving, but none of them suspected that he held their lives in his hands. As the hours dragged on, tension built. The FBI, Seattle police, and airline officials prepared for the handover. Cooper's instructions were precise. The plane would land, passengers would be released, but the crew would remain on board for the next phase of his plan. At around 5:45 p.m., the Boeing 727 touched down at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Night had fallen. Rain drizzled on the runway. The atmosphere was electric with fear. A fuel truck approached the plane, as instructed. Meanwhile, a man in plain clothes, an airline employee, brought a large bag to the aircraft steps. Inside, $200,000 in neatly packed stacks of $20 bills, 10,000 notes in total. With it came the 4 parachutes, rolled and strapped. Through the aircraft window, Cooper watched carefully. He gave strict orders. No police on the tarmac, no snipers, no tricks. The FBI complied. Flight attendant Tina Mucklow was the one who carried the ransom bag and parachutes into the cabin. Cooper inspected them carefully. He counted the stacks. Everything was as demanded. Then, in a surprising act of mercy, Cooper released the 36 passengers. One by one, they walked off the plane into the cold, wet night, completely unaware of the nightmare they had just escaped. Only the crew remained: Captain Scott, First Officer Ratachak, Flight Engineer Anderson, and 2 flight attendants, Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow, the hostages he needed for the next part of his plan. Once the passengers were gone, Cooper laid out his next instructions. They were bizarre, yet strangely specific. The Boeing 727 must fly south toward Mexico City. Altitude, no higher than 10,000 feet. Speed, no faster than 200 knots. Landing gear, kept lowered. Cabin, kept unpressurized. The pilots protested. Such conditions were dangerous and would require multiple refuels before reaching Mexico. But Cooper was firm. Then came the most chilling order. Keep the rear air stairs extended during flight. The crew realized what this meant. Cooper intended to jump into the night sky. By now, the world outside was holding its breath. FBI agents surrounded the airport. The media swarmed the scene, and inside that plane, one man with a bomb was preparing to vanish into the stormy skies. What no one knew was that the most mysterious escape in American history was about to begin. November 24, 1971, Seattle-Tacoma Airport. The passengers were gone. The money had been delivered. The parachutes were on board. Now only the flight crew remained, trapped with a man who held the world's attention. A man about to do the impossible. Inside the cabin, Cooper was calm, always calm. He checked the parachutes, carefully selecting one main chute and one reserve. He tucked the ransom bag into a canvas sack and secured it to his body with parachute straps. He gave one last round of instructions to the pilots. Head south toward Reno, Nevada. Maintain low altitude, no higher than 10,000 feet. Fly at minimum speed, no faster than 200 knots. Keep the cabin unpressurized. These weren't random choices. Cooper knew exactly what he was doing. A pressurized cabin at high altitude would make jumping impossible. At 10,000 feet, the air was breathable, and at low speed, a parachute jump was survivable. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Whoever this man was, he had planned every detail. The Boeing 727 took off again. lifting into the dark, storm-filled sky. Rain lashed against the windows, turbulence shook the cabin. To most, it was the worst possible weather for a parachute jump, but Cooper seemed unfazed. At around 8 p.m., the plane was flying south over the dense forests of Washington. Below, nothing but darkness. Endless pine trees, rivers, and rugged mountains. If Cooper jumped here, survival would be nearly impossible. And yet, that seemed to be exactly his plan. At 8:05 p.m., Cooper ordered flight attendant Tina Mucklow to join the pilots in the cockpit. He wanted to be alone in the cabin. The crew complied, sealing themselves inside the cockpit. They could only imagine what was happening behind them. Then the signal came. A warning light flickered in the cockpit, indicating that the rear air stairs had been deployed mid-flight. The Boeing 727 was unique. It had a rear staircase that could be lowered in flight. Cooper had demanded it for a reason. The crew felt the shift in air pressure. The plane pitched slightly upward. The storm roared louder through the fuselage. Somewhere in the back, Cooper was preparing to leap into history. At around 8:13 p.m., the crew felt something strange. The tail of the aircraft suddenly shifted. The plane's nose dipped downward, requiring correction from the pilots. It was as if a weight had vanished from the rear stairs. That was the moment. Somewhere over the forests of southern Washington, D.B. Cooper jumped. One man, a parachute, $200,000 strapped to his body, and a storm waiting below. The crew waited, terrified. For hours they remained locked in the cockpit, unsure if Cooper was still on board, bomb in hand, or already gone. Finally, near midnight, the plane landed safely in Reno, Nevada, surrounded by armed FBI agents and police. The rear stairs were still lowered. The cabin was empty. No sign of Cooper, no sign of the bomb, no trace at all. Within minutes, FBI agents stormed the plane. They found Cooper's seat, still bearing cigarette butts, a bourbon glass, and a black tie with a mother-of-pearl clip. But Cooper himself vanished. Search teams were dispatched across the forests of Washington state. Helicopters combed the darkness. Ground teams battled rain and mud, hunting for parachute silk or money bags. But the night yielded nothing. The greatest manhunt in aviation history had begun. But on that stormy night, D.B. Cooper had disappeared like a ghost. One man against the storm, one jump into the unknown, and a mystery that would haunt America for decades. Did D.B. Cooper survive the jump, or did he vanish forever into the wilderness? The truth lay hidden in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, waiting to be uncovered. November 24th, 1971, ended with more questions than answers. A man had hijacked a plane, taken $200,000 in ransom, and parachuted into a stormy night, never to be seen again. The FBI called it NORJAC, short for Northwest Hijacking. What followed was the most extensive manhunt in American aviation history. Within hours, more than 300 FBI agents, police officers, and military personnel launched a search across the dense forests of southwestern Washington. Helicopters scanned from above. Ground teams trudged through rivers, mountains, and miles of wilderness. But they found nothing. No parachute, no ransom money, no body. It was as if D.B. Cooper had vanished into thin air. The FBI began with what Cooper left behind: a black clip-on tie, 8 Raleigh cigarette butts, a bourbon and soda glass. Forensics in the 1970s were limited. No usable fingerprints were found, and DNA technology was still decades away. Agents turned to eyewitnesses. Flight attendants Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow described Cooper as a white male, mid-40s, about 6 feet tall, with dark hair and a calm, commanding voice. His behavior suggested military or aviation experience. But beyond the description, Cooper was a ghost. Over the years, the FBI investigated more than 800 suspects. Some stood out. Richard Floyd McCoy, a former Green Beret who hijacked a plane in 1972 using a nearly identical method. He escaped with $500,000 but was caught 2 days later. Many believed he was Cooper, but the FBI later ruled him out. He was too young, and the physical description didn't match. Dwayne Weber. On his deathbed in 1995, Weber told his wife, "I'm Dan Cooper." His fingerprints and DNA, however, didn't match evidence from the plane. Kenneth Christensen, a former Northwest Airlines flight attendant and World War II paratrooper. He matched some of the description, and his background fit, but again, no conclusive evidence tied him to the hijacking. William J. Smith, Sheridan Peterson, Barbara Dayton. The list went on and on. Each theory had holes. Each suspect faded into doubt. For years, no trace of the ransom money surfaced. Then, in 1980, a breakthrough. Sort of. A young boy named Brian Ingram was digging in the sand along the Columbia River when he discovered 3 bundles of decayed $20 bills, nearly $6,000 in total. The serial numbers matched Cooper's ransom. But how did the money get there? Had Cooper drowned in the river? Did he bury it himself as a diversion? The discovery deepened the mystery rather than solving it. Could Cooper have survived the jump? The FBI publicly maintained it was unlikely. The weather was brutal. Heavy rain, freezing winds, poor visibility. The terrain below was unforgiving. Dense forests, rivers, and cliffs. Cooper wore only a business suit and loafers, no survival gear. Yet others argued that his precise demands, the parachutes, the low altitude, the unpressurized cabin, showed a man with training, perhaps ex-military, perhaps a paratrooper. If anyone could survive such conditions, maybe Cooper was that man. For decades, agents chased leads. Witnesses were re-interviewed, suspects interrogated, new evidence tested. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially closed the case. They admitted they had exhausted every lead. D.B. Cooper had beaten them. To this day, the hijacking remains the only unsolved case of air piracy in American history. In the end, D.B. Cooper became more than just a criminal. He became a folk hero. To some, he was a daring outlaw who humiliated the FBI and walked away with a fortune. To others, he was a reckless thief who likely perished in the wilderness. But one fact remains undeniable. In just one night, a calm stranger with a briefcase and a plan vanished into the storm and into legend. And so, the story of D.B. Cooper lives on, half fact, half myth, forever unsolved. Was he a master criminal who got away with the perfect crime, or just a desperate man who never made it past the trees? We may never know. But one thing is certain. On that cold November night in 1971, a man stepped onto a plane in Portland and disappeared into history. You've been watching Mystery in the Dark. If this story gripped you as much as it has gripped the world for over 50 years, make sure to subscribe, because the shadows of history are filled with mysteries yet to be told. Until next time, stay curious, stay in the dark.